Well, thanks everybody for coming, and especially to Colleen and Baseera and Bill and Lizzy for moderating on such short notice. I really appreciated it because a lot of people I've been talking to, and I think several people here have been, I wanted to put the panel together so we can have a conversation with people who have been and are currently active with organizations and are artists. And just have kind of an open, organic conversation about what you've been doing and are doing. And then we can have a Q&A and continue discussion over drinks and pizza. So I will leave it to you, Lizzy. And just thank you for coming out. Sorry, that's informal, but I'm really happy stuff.
Thank you guys for having me. I think I'm going to follow Baseera's inclination to make this less formal, and if you at any point have any questions or follow-up questions while I'm sort of doing the moderation or whatever, just jump in, like if you need clarification, if something doesn't make sense, or if there's some kind of follow-up right away in the moment, just ask it, because this is a nice small group of people, and I think we can have a really productive conversation as a group. So I'm going to start by just handing it over to the panelists to introduce themselves briefly and sort of briefly describe who you are, what your practice is as an artist, and sort of what brought you to be sitting here in this particular panel on art and activism. And so maybe I'll start with Colleen.
Sure. Hi, I'm Colleen. I know some of you. So I'm an artist and I've done political work for some time, and for me those are pretty distinct. I mean, my politics certainly inform my work just as they inform, my relationships in my everyday life, but I don't really consider, and I could talk about this at some point in more depth if it's of interest, but I definitely make a clear kind of division between my work as an artist and my work as an activist. Originally, when Drea invited me to be a part of the panel, she asked me to talk about Occupy. That was something I was involved in organizing leading up to Occupy, and then involved in organizing during it, and I can certainly talk about that if it's of interest. More recently, some of the groups that I've been working with include the Brooklyn Defense Committee, which is trying to direct interventions against ICE and protect people. The new Sanctuary Committee, which is doing work along similar lines, but specifically what I've been involved in is a immigration clinic that they run at Judson on Tuesday night, which is basically just helping people. They do a lot more work than this, but this is what I've done, helping people go through the asylum application process. I work with a group called Red League, which is a communist group that organizes different kind of outreach events. We're organizing a reading next week. We're also working to organize the beginning of an organizing meeting around policing and immigration in Flatbush in early January. So I can talk about that more if people are interested. And then the last thing I'll say is I'm doing a little bit of work with organizing a queer workers union. So, and we're also trying to organize something for January, so I can talk more about that.
Yeah. Well, so I'm basically in the sandwich of two amazing activists that I have known about and their activity for a very long time. I don't necessarily call myself an activist. I only just recently started calling myself an artist. However, I have gone through the traditions of schooling, being an artist, and I'm certainly active within all of my very dissimilar communities. So I am a femme person of color, and that's difficult for me to say to you because I always feel like I'm like this sore thumb sticking out in every room. I'm also Muslim, and my family is really Islamic, and I grew up in Texas, and my brother recently erected a $32 million cost mosque in Denton, Texas. It was like the first city within Texas and within the southern region to have a mosque. And so that in and of itself has been something where I don't consider myself an activist, but I do consider that I'm active within different communities because I, as the youngest person in an immigrant family, was like someone who activated the conversation about interfaith. And so that leads me to what I do with my art practice, which is I am a conceptual artist. I love aesthetics, but I think about issues of conflict and kinship primarily. I think about like systems of migration, of why these migrations are happening. I think about or like try to like think through what does it mean to be a political refugee? What does it mean to be an immigrant? What does it mean to be someone that's undocumented? What do those people look like? Where does intersectionality come into that? Why does, say, like a Black person from India, and I'm using those words very specifically, a Black person from India who's migrated to the United States, why is that person an immigrant, but then a white person from Syria is a political refugee if they're coming from the same systems of exile? So, you know, I think about things like that. So things that I have done locally is when I first moved to New York in 2007, I was broke. Just got out of undergraduate school, and so I was like looking around on Craigslist for jobs, and I posted my resume, and I was like, hey, here I am, this is me. And Brick Rotunda Gallery, which is actually where I initially met you through Alan Reed, right? Mm-hmm. Looked at my Facebook feed because, as you know, like nonprofits are always really stressing about cash. And so instead of like posting something for a lot of money on NIFA, what the directors of Brick did is they like looked on Craigslist to find my rickety ass. And so what happened was they saw this resume and they saw like a few people that they had been familiar with. They called those people and then they asked me randomly on Craigslist, do you want to be the general manager, curator person at Brick? And so I just like miraculously was able to get this position.
How does that happen?
Yeah, exactly. So I would like to claim right now in 2016 that I activated emerging Brooklyn artists in New York, because this was well before Brooklyn Museum started to look towards emerging artists. I provided a lot of space and a lot of platforms for young and emerging Brooklyn curators and Brooklyn artists and Brooklyn educators. So that's something that I've done. I'm trying to claim that as something I'm doing. Let's see, what else am I doing? After Trump became sort of the elected president at 2 a.m. that night, the next day was like, let's have a meeting. And so I am really interested in sort of being an active person within the space that is POCQ left. W, anything else, any other letter that you want to attach to that. And basically I want to create a gridded system of people that are willing to share their resources on a daily basis. For example, something that William and I were saying earlier is, for example, if I have a bladder infection and I don't have health insurance, instead of paying $350 for a letter from a doctor saying she has a UTI, and then going and spending $50 at the drugstore to get the medication, I would like to get online and get in this gridded system and see who's in my local area who's willing to just sign a piece of paper and then go to the drugstore and pay $50 instead of $350. Or like, who can waive my cancellation fee if I need to cancel a plane ticket and then like rebuy another plane ticket. Like, so like daily monetary alleviation. And this gridded system isn't something that I'm trying to do real quick. It's just like a thing that like having these meetings like this, calling it like hashtag what next, and then just like creating a generative system that then in 4 years, when Donald Trump has completely ruined everything that's left in this country, we at least have this kind of third world order to rely on as artists in New York City. Lastly, I'm sorry that I'm talking so much, but there's another thing that I kind of am claiming that I'm doing, which is I am starting to lay claim for like artists that are graduating college to use me as an intern person. So I've just in the last like 3 or 4 days have been signing a lot of people's visa papers to like say like if they call, I'm claiming that they're helping me do A, B, and C. So they have like an artist who's working and who's a professional teacher at Parsons, whatever, so they can push their paperwork forward. And also, I created like a cost analysis in terms of where my family's from in Bangalore, where there's like water droughts and cost effectiveness in Texas, and it only costs $2,000 to build a 54-foot water well in parts of India where like there is absolutely no water. And so my family and I are like putting little pieces of money together to build wells all around India. So that's like something that we're doing. And there's other things, but nothing like nothing that's an organization. That's it.
Hi, William Powhida, but please call me Bill. I think I'm sort of an accidental activist. I mean, the work that I was doing early on, the mid-2000s, was just sort of poking fun at the art world or thinking about this kind of commercial market that I had stumbled into after graduating in 2001. But in 2010, I organized a project called #Class with an artist named Jennifer Dalton. And in the course of that, where we just sort of occupied a commercial art gallery and asked the question, is art really just a luxury commodity for the super wealthy or the transnational elite? During the course of that project, I met Wage, so Lisa Scone and A.K. Burns and A.L. Steiner really posed this sort of question, for artists. If you're going to work with a nonprofit, are you going to get paid for that work in any way? And so in 2010, wage was still a sort of a question that artists could ask institutions. And since then, I've worked with Wage, just helping interpret some of their data from their study. So I've been a sort of Wage supporter, which is worked on the certification model for nonprofit institutions. Are people familiar with Wage? Okay, I mean, sort of like halfway. Yeah, they're about to also release an artist certification program for individual artists called Wagency. And it basically is the outlines of an artists union that is meant to sort of push back against this transnational elite and ask the question, what does it mean for us to be working for billionaires? And that the idea of being paid for your work would help sort of push back against the exceptional status of artistic labor. So that's, I feel like I've just been a sort of Wage supporter for many years. And then in about 2013, I got involved with a small group of people that were trying to think about affordable workspace in New York, obviously in part because of the rising costs of studios. And that work didn't really yield anything ultimately, but it led me to the Artist Studio Affordability Project, which Jenny Dubnow and Tamara Zakayev started, which really is pushing for artists to think about themselves more as small businesses and to advocate for a bill called the Small Business Job Survival Act, which is sort of sitting in City Council. And some version of this bill has been around since the 70s. And it would provide the ability to have some commercial rent negotiation with landlords. And so ASAP has really been pushing this bill hard, working with like the Chamber of Commerce in Queens and actually aligning artists with small businesses so that we're, again, not asking for anything sort of special or any set-asides, but trying to get some sort of commercial rent protections. And, in my own work now, some of it has drifted more towards what I would think is sort of an activist position. Jennifer Dalton and I did a project called Month to Month in the spring, where we were really, thinking about the ways in which artists play into the kind of gentrification, both the reality of it and also the kind of cultural narrative. And also with Occupy, I got involved with the Arts and Labor group for about 6 months and spent a lot of time with that, the kind of core group. And I think Lise was doing some work at that point as well about trying to think about an artist union. And unfortunately, within Arts and Labor, the artist union working group was the first one to just say, we can't do this. So I'm really happy that Wage has sort of picked that up and is really kind of pushing that. And hopefully we'll be launching relatively soon. So I can talk about any of those things more.
Thank you. This is slip back here to my early notes. Sorry. And I got this new notebook and it's like totally falling apart on me. But that's what I get for paying $2 for it. But so hi, I'm Lizzy De Vita. I'm really happy to moderate this. I just thought I'd introduce myself too. I also don't really consider myself an activist, but I like bringing people together and talking about ideas with them. And I think that a lot of times that helps foment change through a ripple effect, which can take forms that I can't possibly imagine because my brain and foresight is limited, being human. And I consider this kind of work to be an extension of my own practice, which really examines language and the ways that people come together through relationships and through moments where the boundaries between ourselves and others are blurred. So thank you all for introducing yourselves. I'm really excited to start this conversation. I'm somewhat intimidated, actually, but mostly excited. I see you each as having different inlets into the activist realm. Colleen, you mentioned that you have these distinct, you have a very distinct way of viewing your life as an activist and your life as an artist. Baseera, you kind of were born into various communities which, for better or for worse, called you into different types of actions. That's how I interpreted what you were saying. And Bill, mostly through your practice, it seems, you entered into an activist vocabulary. I'm curious for each of you to go into a little bit more detail about how it is for you balancing an art career with your desires, impulses, needs to participate and foment change through your different types of activism. Anybody want to go first? I'll just let you. Colleen. Sorry.
I mean, because my political work doesn't take place in my studio or in art spaces, like that's like entirely a pragmatic question for me. Just like one of like time management, right? Which I don't feel like is that interesting to talk about because it's something like we all struggle with, right?
But I do think that, like, to a certain extent, there's a philosophical tension there.
Yeah.
In some senses, just in terms of what Bill's talking about and like what does it mean to be producing work for an unregulated multi-billion-dollar market and benefiting from that to, say, buy you time that you need to balance, So I think it's as much philosophical as it is practical, but I think I'm certainly interested in both.
Sure, yeah, and I guess I can say, in terms of like why I made a very, clear decision some time ago to do my political work outside of the art world. There's actually a lot of reasons for that. One is just that I found the like political orientation in a lot of art spaces to be more like generally liberal, and the folks that I've done political work with have been largely like communists and anarchists. So there's that. Also, like Lizzy's question was, very leading in a direction that I obviously agree with. Like, if you're doing work against capitalism, like doing it within galleries and, even in New York, like nonprofit or artist-run spaces still like very much filter into that is like a contradiction. That contradiction is a part of all of our everyday lives because it's not like we can like opt out of capitalism when we're in certain spaces and like opt in when we're in others. But That's, another reason. And then I also, one connection maybe, and this gets to the kind of philosophical direction of your question, that I can make between how I think about work as an artist, or I think how we broadly think about work as an artist, and how I think about it as an activist is in terms of process, right? So as artists, we understand that the material process that we undergo to make work is part of the content. And that's a connection, a ready connection I see in the conversations I have with artists about work and the conversations I have with activists about political work. So, for example, a group of anarchists that had a leader that they all submitted themselves to would be a contradiction in process, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole idea of prefigurative politics is about trying to organize in such a way that you're modeling and working towards the kind of political situation you're aspiring to on a larger level. So, I think about the kind of contradictions that are inherent in the process of doing political work as an artist, right? It all gets submitted under your name. It's, especially in New York, filtered towards certain spaces which are, geared towards the worst sorts of capitalism. So yeah, again, that's why, for me, I've made a kind of clear division.
Bill, I'm having you go next because I feel like you could respond.
Well, it's a tough one. I mean, what was the real
so
question?
I know I let it out with this big narrative, but basically the bottom line question is, how do you sort of balance or reconcile your work as an artist with your work as an activist?
That, I think, because so much of my work was about the arts economy and its kind of affective economy, the real economics of it, for me in 2009 when I did this drawing about the new museum showing the trustees' collection, Dakajanu, who's a Greek shipping magnate billionaire guy, one of the responses to that work was, so what? So you showed this picture of how things are, what are you going to do about it? And that was an enormous amount of responsibility. I was like, what? It's how do you fix capitalism? Or where's socialism, But it started a number of conversations, including one with Ben Davis, who, I don't know if you're familiar with his writing or his book 9.5 Theses on Art and Class. But he got right into a lot of the paradoxes and positions we find ourselves as artists. We are middle class by definition. We own our own means of production and labor. We're small businesses. But we do have this exceptional position within the sphere of the ruling class. And we have access to that world through art. We're sort of overvalued culturally. And that, that first drawing at the new museum, one of the responses was, I think Ben threw it out there, maybe you should curate a show. And I was thinking, well, what would be the right form for that if we want to model the kind of world we want to see, not let's get some art up on the wall. So with #class, we just transformed it into a think space, for lack of a better term, and invited people just to submit questions and ideas for 30 days of conversation. And also, let's have the gallery open on Sunday, because that's a day when people can actually come when they're not working. Let's keep it open later so that people who have jobs can come. Let's make the bathroom accessible so that you can use the bathroom in the space. That process led to at least Ben ultimately responded with 9.5 Theses on Art and Class that he posted on the windows and turned that into a book. I felt like Wage gave them a bit of a platform and also taught a lot of artists about what that was and led to an ongoing relationship with them. And I think after that project, my own work just kind of bifurcated into stuff for art fairs that I feel pretty gross about making on many levels, selling it to capitalists, but at least in the content of the work, whether it's totally symbolic or not, I can talk about the conditions of the art world that I find so sort of abhorrent. But then, thinking about, we can't opt out of capitalism yet. So Wage's model is really appealing in the sense that it's starting within the system where we're at and what agency do artists have, you know, and trying to also draw down some of the superstars who make enormous amounts of money to, you know, lend their cultural capital and value to this idea of unionizing as artists, which I think is really hard because the whole value system of the arts is individual authorship, you know, this kind of absolute emphasis on the individual and individual vision, which makes it really hard to work with groups or to submit to a group identity or to, like, you know, work together around goals, you know, like we want to accomplish something, where the art world is built on. I was just in a show, or went down to Savannah to visit my wife's family. We went to the Jepson Art Center, and the whole show is called just, you know, Uncertainty. You know, it was like the title of this contemporary art exhibition. So in art, we obviously privilege and value complexity and uncertainty, and anything that would have a goal is sort of just labeled as didactic, you know, stuff. You know, like Claire Bishop can write a book about it. You know, it's like artificial hell. You have a goal or an idea. So I find the two value systems are really highly incompatible in a lot of ways, and that separating them is probably a necessary, like, defense mechanism. You know, I think part of my practice now is trying to find ways to think about how art can operate outside of a white cube space. What does art really allow us to do? Can we create unusual situations to kind of get people out of their sort of normal routines? And also, how can it be a platform for other artists? So with Month to Month, one of the most successful projects that Jen and I helped organize was Gentrifiers Anonymous that Oesa Duvernay and Mildred Beltry put together. And initially, you know, they were like, we want to just do some screen printing in the space around gentrification. But after an hour conversation, they're like, we want to confess our complicity in gentrification, and we want to invite others to do that. And it came from the idea of going to the Park Slope Food Co-op, where people would, like, say really crazy things
so in trouble with them.
on the PA system or something, like some passive aggressive, you know, like. Anyway, it turned out to be a really powerful piece, and at first Oesa and Mildred said it was a one-off, but thankfully they brought it to Brick, and they, you know, built out their GA model, and, you know, sort of like 12 steps to not being an asshole in the process of gentrification, and are doing the GA in the lobby of one of the luxury condos that have shot up there. So that feels like authentic work that doesn't feel as compromised than, say, showing a crumpled paper list at Pulse or Fair, you know, like, it's pretty nasty.
All right, guys.
So, I mean, so,
I have some things to say. I'm
I'm gonna let you start, because...
Well, I have always had problems with borders. So I think that's why I've hesitated so long to consider myself an artist.
I think one of the nice things about working with Wage is that one of the other sides of A.L. Steiner's project is Ridiculous, that she does with Nicole Eisenman, and they're one of the few groups that were like, they did a show just about rage and what you do with, like, anger in this system, and it was probably, you know, one of the few times as an artist and a human being I felt like it was a safe space to just be, you know, sort of, what do you do with that rage?
Yeah.
You know, and they found a productive, interesting way.
I call it braid rage,
Mm-hmm.
like thinking of braids and, you know, aesthetics of rage.
Well, it's interesting that that's such an important, you know, factor for you, especially since you have stated that you're not outwardly affiliated with any organization. I feel like there are not a lot of institutional spaces that allow for that rage to occur, say what you just mentioned. I remember the Black Women Artists for Black Lives Matter event at the New Museum, and that was really exciting to see because they positioned the range of feeling from grief to joy, which I think was important because there aren't a lot of spaces for joy, especially for Black women artists, there's just a lot of great sadness. But my biggest question leaving that was that, you know, we were leaving that space back into the space of rage, and it went unacknowledged by any kind of, or unsanctioned, I guess, by any institution. So how do you create, how do you create a space for rage aside from maybe sitting in a windowless basement or in a bunker with a group of like-minded individuals?
I mean, I think humor is a really amazing place. Like, Trevor Noah is one of my idols, for example. Like, his story is really severe, where he comes from, in terms of like growing up in the apartheid, and he is just like shaping and making space for that rage, like on global television. And that's like a really great example of someone who is truly an artist and activist with his words, you know? And so like, and it also took me a long time to try to figure out like what kind of artist am I, because I remember when I first moved to New York, I have this friend named Alan Reed, and Colleen knows Alan, and I remember like being like, Colleen, could I please have a studio visit with you? You're so amazing. Like, could you come over to my little hovel and have a studio visit with me? And you know, at that time I was like really trying to like fit into like a space. Like, I went to painting school, I am a painter, you know, type of thing. But then even at that time, I was like a master of distraction. Like, I don't think I ever really did talk about my paintings with you. Like, you were like, what about this green painting with the shoes? And I was like, look at this, you know, you know. So I think it's just like words have always shaped countries and shaped rage and given space. And so, and then there's like other spaces, like psychic spaces, like music, dance, productive places within the arts that can help shape policy, you know? Like, musicians go to the White House all the time, you know? Like, people in theater and in dance, like they're always shaping politics inadvertently. Because I think there's a power in the psychic space. I just think that language is limiting. That's why it's important as an activist, if you are an artist, it's important to like know that art is essentially all that's left at the end of the day, you know, because it's one thing for me that penetrates a psychic space, or like some kind of collective energy.
Did Colleen and Bill, do you share that feeling about art, just that faith in art?
No. I'm just like judging myself the grump on the panel. I don't.
Can I just say quickly, I'm like duplicitous in me saying that. Like, I also am completely 100% behind you. Like, art is shit. But, you know, like, it's also at the end of the day, like, we'll all burn and go wherever, but then like a plant's gonna grow up from our ashes, you know, and like that's art for me, like in a very philosophical sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, the show that I'm working on, I don't know if I'll finish it, I hope I finish it. It's for a show at the Aldrich in March, and it's called After the Contemporary. And I've been thinking about this idea of like, looking back from a very privileged institutional perspective in like 2050 at this period of time, say 2000 to 2025, and just naming it very clearly contemporary art. Like, not all art, this is not all art, this is the stuff that, you know, we've made over the last 20 years or so, just, you know, the finding form in the art fair, you know, this kind of like formulaic production, all the stuff that kind of goes into it, who it's for, who this audience is. And it's a kind of gross place to be, to think about art in this way. I don't have a lot of faith in that part of art, you know, and yet at the same time I totally hear you that, you know, to single people out for succeeding in this system, or to say, oh, it's so bad, you shouldn't do that, that sucks, you know. At the same time, it is such a star system that like 7% of arts graduates make their living as artists, you know. I mean, it is such a kind of narrow vision of what art is, and so much of it is just about buying and selling objects that it's really gross. And I think, you know, thinking about what happens next or what follows this or what are the other possibilities of art are really important. And I mean, listening to you talk, I was just thinking about, you know, sort of like Joseph Boy's kind of crazy premise that seems crazy now, that art is this radical thing, that everyone is an artist and that it is life and it is any kind of creative transformation of just the substance of the world. And that seems to be it's such odds with the intense elitism of the art world. It is the least democratic place I think I've ever been in, you know, the art market kind of thing. From the price of the artwork to the people that you have to deal with to the total speculative nature of it. Go ahead and work for a year and a half and then gamble and see if you sell anything. And then get good luck getting paid if you do sell it, if you're working with people that are also barely making rent and trying to live off that side of it as well. It's not really a great, I don't have any answers at this point other than I do imagine that at some point, unless structurally things change in this world, you know, if income and wealth inequality are going to reach historic levels soon that we haven't seen before in the history of the world, you know, art's going to go away with it, or at least contemporary art will just kind of go off into something, and maybe there's more interesting possibilities outside of that. But until that changes, I don't know what we can, you know, do. Other than, you know, really, I mean, the question I have now is, like, I feel like I've been, you know, a fairly good Democrat or a liberal person, but Occupy Wall Street was probably the most radical thing I've experienced in terms of some attempt at self-governance, and I don't know how to do that in the rest, you know, in this world right now, politically, and what we can do to change policy or law, you know.
Did you want to respond to that, Colleen? Because I know you initially wanted to be the grump of the...
I'm the grump with like great reluctance.
No, I can be grumpy.
Yeah, like I mean, even like the premise of this panel makes me just like a little bit uncomfortable because I'm someone who like typically, you know, again, like all of my political work has been outside of art spaces and that's been a decision on my part. But, you know, like obviously art is really important to me. Like I would distinguish art from the art world, and I know that's, you know, there's not a firm line there, but nevertheless, like the reasons that we all, I assume all value art are independent from, or, you know, not independent in the sense that they're like structurally entangled with, but nevertheless, like what we value about art, I'm sure we can all imagine existing outside of this like structurally oppressive system that we all, I'm sure, have issues with, or else we wouldn't be in this room. But I actually like wanted to maybe like rewind a little bit, because when you were talking about rage, it was making me think about how you began to introduce yourself, just by like beginning saying like I am a femme and I'm a woman of color, and so to like pick back up on that conversation that kind of threaded through some of the things we were just talking about in terms of race and sexuality and sexual identity, like something that I've learned the hard way through my political organizing is that if I am thinking about working with a group of people, or well, at this point it's just thinking about working with a group of people. In the past, if I were to find myself working with a group of people that's primarily white and primarily male and primarily cis, like these days I just won't even go into that room. Like I will only work with groups of people that like center POC voices, center the voices of women and trans folks and queer folks. So like that, you know, again, in terms of trying to think about like how we think of the process of our political organizing as like modeling what we want that political organizing to achieve, like I just, those are the spaces that I work with.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was listening to you and I'm like such a fan of both of these people. That's all I have to say. But I was actually thinking about back in the day when we had master painters, you know, like the kind of like genesis of this like Dutch capital gallery system. we had people patroning, artists who like, hey, will you paint my wife's bosom or whatever that needed to happen. And then I know that at Parsons right now, I'm wedged in between this weird, between art, technology, and politics, and art history, and comparative literature. Like, there's this little wedge that's called integrated design, and that's like the department that I'm in right now. And it's kind of like a weird thing that I feel like the further we go into your, for example, in your exhibition that's about 2050 or whatever.
Yeah.
What's going to probably happen in my mind is that we're going to go back to that place where the only art is made by incredibly wealthy people that are buying people to make artifacts for them.
Mm.
It's going to just go back. And to take it away from that, the kind of transportation is only going to happen through some kind of virtual space where I'm going to go to China, and you open up your closet and you turn on a machine that sends you to China, but you're still in your closet. You're trapped in the closet, I mean, that's the future for me. That's really what I think is going to happen. And I have proof. I'm a conspiracy theorist, so I really have proof that I can create a lineage of that being the future, because the future is always the past. History always repeats itself, and that's what's so scary about the trajectory that we're going in, especially with aligning Trump with the Holocaust. That's what makes that kind of scary, because there's no rules anymore, whereas before there was at least a thin line of engagement with public and what a politician can and can't say. So that's kind of what I see art becoming, just going out. And then maybe there's transgressive spaces that happen in the tunnels, like it used to be, in the tunnels.
Yeah. I'm so sad. That's very sad. What do we do? I think is, and I know that's a big loaded question, but it's kind of, I know that's on a lot of people's minds, and certainly a lot of young artists that I have relationships with reached out to me in the days after the election, kind of asking that question, asking, well, should I become a lawyer now? Or what should I do? So I think this is a question maybe that is a good moment to open it up also to the audience, to participate as well, because there's not an answer, right? But I think it's certainly worth thinking about out loud together.
Does anyone want to go first?
I have a lot of questions, I guess, but Bill, I wanted to ask you, we've met a couple times, but not talked so much, and I missed I've only heard about this, I guess, apocryphally, but from my friend Christoph, who saw it, but at Marlborough.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I think you speak really clearly to a kind of paradox or something, a conflict, and that always seemed to me that comes up in my head. Just what I heard from, I didn't see it. I don't think I even seen a photo of the exhibition or anything, but I think about.
Can you say what you've heard or something? Because I'm totally lost.
Right.
Yeah, no.
So,
What's that?
yeah, well, I was hoping he could explain it because I probably have it wrong. But basically, what Christoph told me was that you had a show, you got an offer a show at Marlborough, right? And they're trying to do stuff over there. They're in a very old gallery that has new management. So right,
The billionaire's son took over.
Yeah.
He was in his 20s, and he wanted to transform the business into contemporary art gallery.
Right, so he said, okay, we're really stodgy, and I'm like coming in to like do, and so he just started grabbing things, and he wanted to do a show with him, and so what I was told was that, I don't know if there's any other works, I don't know what was on the wall, but that somebody showed up, a guy showed up, there was like some velvet rope area, and this guy in sunglasses comes in, maybe with some like escorts or something, and sits and like basically acts like a total asshole, and it's supposed to be Bill, but you weren't there.
Yeah, no, I was actually it was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, doing a Connecting Communities residency, working with the local community to draw people they'd never met to kind of create a cultural self-portrait. Yeah, I hired an actor that I'd worked with in the past to play the artist and just installed him in the gallery and, you know, put my name up there and 9-foot letters, and it was one artwork for sale that was painted by Tom Sanford. It was a portrait of the artist with like a bottle of champagne. My friend Jen Dalton said the show was, if you took anything good out of an opening and left all the bad parts, that's what it was. And in part it was site-specific to Marlborough because their history as a gallery, they had stolen from the Rothko estate. They were this sort of like, my idea of like the worst blue chip gallery ever. So that was, you know, trying to use some humor to get at some of the rage that I felt, you know, particularly in that time period, you know. I'm trying to remember exactly what year that was, if it was before or after Occupy Wall Street. You know, it was sort of just like this, you know, sense of absolute privilege in the art world, my own privilege as a white male. You know, that is like the furthest thing away from what to do now, though. You know, I do feel like one of the things it's been hard to reconcile is using satire and humor, because I did not experience, say, any of that at Occupy Wall Street and Arts and Labor. It was so process-oriented, you know, trying to find ways to make activism interesting or to communicate to people, I think is one of the biggest challenges that I've, you know, found through that kind of work. There's nothing quite as demoralizing as standing in a free speech pen, you know, outside of like to protest the de Blasio, you know, State of the Union address. Just sit in your pen with your signs and the motorcade drives past you. You know, it's like, who are we talking to and how are we communicating? I think my response to a lot of this, to what to do now, was to get involved with groups like ASAP, who is a member of the Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network, and the work that they're trying to do to bring together different groups to push back against gentrification, I think is more important than sort of ever, because now we've sort of lost the federal government, any support on that side. We'll have to actively oppose them. But I think, you know, people should join Wage. You know, if you're an artist, just go to wageforwork.com, sign up on their list, and when the artist certification comes out, there'll be 2 levels. One is for if you're like a commercially successful artist, you can think about joining it. And if you just want to be a Wage supporter, you don't have to adhere to all of the demands that they're making, because they are pretty strong. Like paying your artist assistants probably more than $20 an hour, things like that. That would be my one thing, because I think as artists, if we can overcome our own sort of individuality and form a union, it would send a strong signal, I think, and it would probably piss off the billionaires, you know. They want a unionized art world.
I guess hearing a lot of you talk, and specifically, like, I'm glad that you brought up questions of discomfort, Colleen, because I feel like any kind of like what to do now, like art, like the kinds of simple phrasings that are available are sort of like lackluster, especially because none of the issues that we're being confronted with are new issues, right? Like all of this shit existed before like November 8th. It's just that they were more or less urgent in our minds as things, you know, like the idea that like, now we can't rely on the federal government at all, versus like a veneer of like, well, like maybe we can do, or like, you know, now like there is no line between what can be said by a public official and like what's acceptable rhetoric for the US government and what isn't anymore, right? And like that idea of no rules, I think, has like precipitated a level of like or like various levels of panic that just won't subside, I think. Anyway, so I'm happy that you brought that up because, at least for me, one of the elements of, you know, how to get involved has also been like very much trying to understand why I wasn't feeling so panicked before when all of the conditions were structurally the same,
Yeah.
right? And so like talking about how we move forward, I feel like also has a lot to do with what we do with these feelings of incongruity and like precisely how we divide. It's like what the defense mechanisms are, like how we divide like what we do as artists, what we do as not artists, what we do inside of the system, what we do against the system, right? It kind of requires feeling comfortable like with like a certain degree of like weird negative emotions, right? In terms of how, I don't know. I just think that that's an important part of the conversation. So I'm happy it has come up.
Yeah, I mean, agreeing to commit some part of your ongoing life to political work is
Right.
agreeing to live in a place of anxiety.
Right.
And to make yourself uncomfortable.
Yep.
And so like that's like the base level requirement. You have to be willing to do some work.
Right.
I'm also a member of Art Studio Affordability. My name is Paul. And they've led me to, because they're part of the Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network, they've led me to other community organizations like Equality for Flatbush or Uprose in Sunset Park where I live. And I think like, yes, like you have to kind of be a little bit comfortable with like the contradictions of that, and everybody who you come to work with knows that you're part of this system as an artist, but then being able to accept leadership and being able to like kind of check your ego as an artist, which is something that is like really, you know, for our entire arts education, like, you know, poured into us, I think is something that's like, there's, you know, if you can deal with it, if you can live with those contradictions and you can face those contradictions, I think there's something that happens that's transformative.
Question of what next, right? Kind of adding to skill sharing and helping out with the organization. If there is like, with the issue of comfortability or being comforted or feeling uncomfortable, I feel like if everyone could at least be a little uncomfortable by giving up something that they have that is a privilege, I think that's what's going to move us forward, and that's the project. Because, I mean, there are a lot of people that have been waiting just to have equal rights. There are a lot of women that just want to get paid $1 instead of 70 cents. You know, for example, right? So I feel like if there's also like, because we all go through art schools, like the ones that have gone through these traditional methods of school, we're all like trained to be self-entitled, urgent. Urgency is the word that comes up in every studio crit. I feel like if some people could start waiting, while other people that have waited their whole lives for equality could at least get started with their lives, then, you know, there is like a sharing of uncomfortability instead of just a whole class of people that are still waiting online for basic instincts while everybody else gets to show their panties, you know? So I think that you just need to think about what is it that we have that we truly are privileged with, and that what could we just like give away a little bit so we can have a little bit more collective, at least, I mean, thinking about it locally, like just asking that question of like, in this group, we're already making ourselves uncomfortable because there's probably 5 other things that we want to do tonight. And the fact that you came here to just at least cognitively think about something that's just maybe utopic or imaginary is a start. And so if you could kind of just like think about like a daily activity of like giving up something, then all of a sudden, like 4 years down the line, like we could actually be in a much better position. But I don't think that we're trained to do that as artists. We're just trained to have everything urgent, like apply to everything, don't be critical, you know, just take, you know? So, I mean, that's like my suggestion for what's next.
I think it's interesting because that you're linking artist training and, there's been all this talk swirling around about capitalism and, obviously art and capitalism are totally inextricable at this point, at least in the communities we're all sort of a part of. But I think that it is very anti-capitalist to say, oh, let's all be uncomfortable, right? I think that's like fundamentally an anti-capitalist statement. So I think
You're
that there's
sitting on a
something
panel with anarchists. So.
I identify as a communist, but I've done a lot of work with anarchists. Whatever.
But does anyone else have any more follow-up questions? Or kind of...
And I think one thing, and we were talking about like different structures and organizations, like I think we really are, maybe one of the things we're going to see is that the thin veneer of like support services, like what even like the pretense is going to be stripped away.
Right.
And like we need to figure out how to provide those services because they're essential and doing in ways that we actually want them to be done, which aren't dependent on like appeals to the police to mediate every situation, which aren't dependent on like pleading to rich landlords to give you a grant so you can do like defensive like battered women shelters or something like that. We have had at different times, grassroots and underground traditions. The Underground Railroad existed outside of the law to free people. We need to set up systems.
That's the basic situation of what next is a gridded system, like a third world underground tunnel system of people that are willing to.
Yeah, well, and I guess I'm like how I heard your system was just like a network of like friends that can help friends out and like give you perks and stuff like that. And I don't see how that could exist as like a broad system. Like that might help one person at a time in like ways and make things better, but I don't think that's going to replace
I
the world.
totally disagree.
I disagree in the sense that if it could, if it was as convenient as Uber, because we were talking about it before, like laziness, making it, one thing is how do you make activism sort of easy for people to engage through the tools? I used to joke that we needed like Uber for activism, like, or Tinder for activists, like you can just connect and find out where things are happening and how to get involved and be useful. But yeah, if you had like an Uber model for, what's next.
And Uber is like an extremely exploitative model, and that's not any kind of model I want to do political work on. So I'm just gonna strongly say that it's a terrible model.
In terms of the...
I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. I'm not saying that it would be any kind of profit thing like that, but just some interface that you could access that network of people that, not for no percentage taken.
I mean, it could be a well-organized organization of people who are technically willing to volunteer their services, because there's a lot of legal issues around.
Well, as you said, it's illegal too. So like, unfortunately, like in the system, when something is taking advantage of the capitalist system, that's going to be the number one enemy, of the police. I mean, like, especially now with all this intense scrutiny of cyber activity that's about to unfold as when Trump gets in,
Right.
and also like on the Democrat side too, like everybody hates the internet now. So like, though your model sounds amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of why it looks. That's why it kind of looks. I don't know your name. What's your name?
Alexander.
So Alexander, that's kind of why it looks, and what I propose looks like a network. It looks like lazy, kind of activity. But really, what it is like I can give you a personal example. In the past month, I've spent something around almost $1,000 on things that were just simple mistakes that someone could have just flipped a switch. And that fee could have gone away.
But why don't we work to eliminate the fee for everyone rather than networks that?
Well, I'm not trying to be Luke Cage. I'm just a human being who is not trying to be a hero. Who's just trying to as you all are saying, what is next? What is it that I can do that I'm capable of doing and keep my job and be an artist and be a social person in this world? And I feel like.
Yeah, I guess I felt like the question was what can we do?
Everyone can if there's some senses of organizing a network like this, but if everyone could enlist whoever they think, somebody in somebody even from like anywhere from like Apple computer to the airport to MTA to doctor's office to someone at Parsons to whatever, it's like if you can create a list, some kind of a database that you can plug into and find out and then contact that person and then go meet them to get that thing that will save you that $300 that month because you're paying that $300 in health insurance over time, isn't that like a real tangible thing?
So I like the way Gabby framed your question comment, like about like why the sense of what to do now and like the question of like what to do has been an ongoing one. And I guess I just in response to your ideas want to first just say that, and also to perform another rewind and to say in response to your framing, Paul, that like something I see that artists do a lot when we get involved in or try and get involved in political organizing is like show up to spaces and be like, oh, I'm an artist, like I have ideas, I have skills or whatever. And I think it's really important to like learn about what people are already doing and have been doing and like show up as a person willing to do work. So to that end, because I feel like it's really related to some of the things you're talking about, Baseera, like one of the groups that I've been doing work with, the Brooklyn Defense Committee, has been setting up sanctuary spaces. There are 25 churches. This Saturday was an opening of a sanctuary space called the Base in Bushwick. There's a few different, and Alexander's involved in this, so if I'm forgetting to say something important, jump in. There's a rapid response network, so there's an email and a phone number that anybody can call if they're being threatened by ICE. The attempt really is to do something like an underground railroad. So there's a group of people that are committed to like manning those emails and those phones, committed to going to wherever someone's threatened, immediately bringing them to one of these sanctuary spaces. The sanctuary spaces, while committed to holding them for 24 hours or at minimum. There's Know Your Rights trainings, there's all sorts of different trainings that are going, that are a part of that. So this is the only version I have, so I'd love to get it back, but if people want to pass it around, that would be really helpful. But I think like it's great to, as artists, like we have the capacity to like, we have very developed imaginaries, right? So we're good at like figuring out things that haven't been done maybe, but it's really also important to figure out what is being done so we're not reduplicating efforts, so we're like actually talking to people who have political organizing experience. And so that's just one thing that I can plug into as related to this conversation we're having. It's already happening, people are already doing really good work.
I think that, what you're saying Baseera, earlier you made a comment about history repeating, and I think there's something in what Colleen is saying about kind of sort of the longevity of a lot of these efforts, and also I'm also interested in the intergenerationality of our sort of metaphorical analogies that we're saying. We're saying Underground Railroad, where we've had mentions of the Holocaust already, and so how do we create access points between ourselves and people from different generations who do have a more robust and developed level of experience with creating change, given in Vietnam and in different eras. I think that is might also be important and could be another conversation. But
I guess I take for granted that any conversation that we're having here is prefaced by the inclusion of all of the amazing work that's happening right now. There's like probably 30 different meetings happening all across the city right now of like things that have been happening.
Right, but I think how it can be inclusive to that end is by like sharing, like I'm sure we all know about different, some of that's come up already, right? Like this, when we were emailing about it, this panel, I was like, my experience, and this also goes back to what you were saying, Gabby, is like my experience in political spaces since November 8th has been like every little tiny meeting has just been flooded with all sorts of people who have like never gone to anything political in their life and are wanting to figure out how to get involved. So yeah, for like people who have some experience to be like, this is stuff that's happening,
Right.
and these are ways that you can get involved.
I mean, I think also just to follow, I mean, and I know that this is maybe not something that we all need to hear, but like something which seems to be useful is like the amount of people who are artists or not artists who are just like, I just don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, I can think of like 5 things off the top of my head which involve like simple Google searches. And it's ridiculous that I have to tell you to Google them, right? But apparently that seems to be like the thing, right? Like people who want to do something but are not that interested in being engaged, like need a list of things that they can do. Or something like this, right? Like it needs to be like, oh, like now I know about the Brooklyn Defense Council, you should volunteer for that, right? Like, or whatever.
Are there lists?
No, well, I mean, that's part of the thing is that it's the activist community that when you start like through ASAP and learning that they're a part of BAN and seeing all of the groups that are connected to BAN,
Right.
and that those, you know, like with ASAP, we were going up to the Laundromat Project and meeting with Alicia Guerin to start talking about, well, if artists are coming for the Bronx, they're going to be white, they're going to have MFAs, and ASAP is not in support of that. You know, how do we mitigate that? And so started having these conversations and ended up, you know, at a protest about the rezoning up in the Bronx, you know. And so there were a few of us. Part of ASAP, one of the biggest challenges is not too many artists really actually want to go in support of other people's, you know, problems.
Right.
They want to come to the Brooklyn Museum because there's a photo opportunity or something. We had too many artists, you know. Or, I mean, there's a fundamental question that I think we also have to think about is we, as activist groups, like ASAP would love to have artists show up for things, but they don't. And then when people show up, if we're annoyed with them because they don't know how to enter into a group, you know, or they don't know how to listen or be useful, that, you know, we need to figure out how to address that and talk to people. So that, because we, if we want to change anything, are going to need lots of people. And people that are less educated, less informed, or maybe not sensitive at all, you know. And those numbers, that's still like a big question. How do we get numbers of people? So that, I mean, that's one of the things that I think Wage is sort of useful for, at least on a symbolic level, to get people like sign up, you know, put your name to something.
Yeah, I see 2 different strains here in terms of strategies moving forward. And one is, you know, like big picture kind of engagement, and others are like day-to-day survival tactics that, you know, this kind of third world economy that you're talking about, which I find super interesting. And both of them I think are necessary, and having a foot in both worlds, because we will find ourselves in a situation of increasing discomfort. And I think speaking to what you were saying, people who have problems that are beyond the world of kind of the middle class artist are going to require a lot of assistance and immediate dire assistance. So both things to think about. Were you?
I just think too, activism comes with a lot of anxiety, but in a selfish way, it also comes with a lot of education. It comes with a lot of exchange of ideas, and it's like, if you can also just like encourage your friends to get more involved in local activism because of those reasons, because you will become a more knowledgeable person, and you will become, you will meet people that you won't meet in the art world. I think that's just a reason to encourage other people to get involved in a real way, not just like a superficial way,
Yeah.
to actually jump in and that's all.
Yeah, and something pragmatic along those lines that, because I too have gotten like the emails from former students who are like, I sort of remember that you have like something to do with something. Like,
I was much more specific.
thinking about that, but are like,
I want to do this.
can you like point me in the direction of like people who are doing work? And so I've been trying to do that, but something I've also been thinking about is, affinity groups are a model that a lot of anarchists use, and for anybody who's not familiar with that term, basically just means a group of people who have some affinities, or it could be friends, or it could be, whatever. And, in like a typical kind of anarchist setup, that would be a group of people who are like committing to do political actions together, and there's like someone who's not arrestable, who has like the point person for other affinity groups that is going to do solidarity work for jail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's someone who has like medical training and whatever. But what's really useful about them beyond that is that they're a group of people who are like holding one another accountable. So like we're all going to go to this march on Friday, right? And like, the difference between, I think Baseera, you were like, we're all uncomfortable here because there are like 5 things we'd rather go to, and we all know the difference between whether we go to like any of those 5 things or like don't leave the house at all is whether or not we told someone would see them there.
Yeah.
So I think like a really just like very pragmatic model to speak to like Paul's idea of like how can we talk about ways that activism isn't just like making oneself uncomfortable, but also like doing stuff with friends, is like setting up an affinity group and just committing to like once a week, like we're going to do something. And maybe that means that we join a specific group that meets once a week, or maybe that means like every week we find something different to go to or whatever, but just like we all have groups of friends that we do things with, like for people who are wanting to create a structure that'll keep them politically engaged in a way that's like feels socially intuitive. Like I think that's a really good model.
The question that was pressing on me when I was thinking about this happening was like, because I feel like a lot of these conversations, at least for me, happen in the present, like looking at like what is happening right now, or like what, when Occupy is happening, I'm thinking about Occupy, and when Black Lives Matter is happening, I'm thinking about like, there's so much media about one thing right now, but I was thinking like, okay, what can I look to? Like, what can I look back at? I mean, I'm looking at this and talking about the history of the sanctuary movement. Like, when we're, like, what can I say? Oh man, yeah, like that's a model. Like, they really did, like that was like a great example,
I have more props. So Alexander just recently republished Mumia Abu-Jamal's We Want Freedom, A History of the Black Panther Party. And so here's stickers, and I have lots of these, so you can take one. Just like, I don't know, maybe you want to speak about that?
Yeah, well maybe I'll go even like further to what we connected. So like, and first just, in terms of like having faith and believing that like we can make positive change, like Mumia, yesterday was the 35th anniversary of his arrest, and he still is, he's, been incarcerated on death row for over 25 years now. He's sentenced to die basically of hepatitis in general population.
Could you, because I bet a lot of people here
know
don't
who Mumia
know.
Abu-Jamal is? So he was, he's black man born in Philadelphia. When he was 14, he helped found the Philadelphia branch of the Black Panther Party, but it was just a general member of the, he was a teenager and like went to some places, but he was never in any power structure. But he started writing for the paper and became a journalist, a radio journalist in Philadelphia there, and supported this group called MOVE, which was like a sort of like back to nature, like Afrocentric organization that the Philadelphia police bombed their house out of a helicopter and burnt down several blocks on Osage Avenue. And he was one of the few people that sort of like covered it more like journalistically, which secured the ire of the police. And so one day he came across the police messing with his brother, and he stopped, and he was shot by the police, and a police officer was shot and killed, and they arrested Mumia and charged him and sentenced him to death for that. And he was still doing broadcasts from radio. He was like one of the first political prisoners to get his voice out there, and I think it was Bob Dole tried to cut funding for all of public radio because they were broadcasting him on NPR. And so it became a huge issue for many years. So I don't know. But so then this book that is called We Want Freedom, it started out of his master's thesis, which he did from prison, and like the first 50 pages of the book were handwritten on like lined notebook paper that were done and, you know, edited back and forth by letters through mail with occasional phone calls. But he's still like super positive and like believes that change can happen. And in the new introduction, he's actually is like holding up the abolitionist movement, you know, like right before the Civil War. It was just like, abolition, yeah, you're fucking crazy, man. Like Lincoln was not an abolitionist. He was like, no, that's totally wrong. But now, like, everyone's like, yes, the abolitionist movement was totally right on. Like, how could anyone think that black people should be property, you know? So, like, that's, like, a good example that we can, like, look at. And even, like, and digging deeper, like the William Lloyd Garrison was, like, one of the well-known, like, abolitionists. He had, like, a monthly or weekly newspaper. And I just learned recently that it was actually paid for by, like, black subscribers to it. You know, they were like, here's a white man that can get his news out. And he's not financially successful, but this is important. We're gonna pool our meager resources to support this. And he's gonna help get our message out, so.
Yeah, and with the Hep C thing, just to come full circle.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
so yeah, Mumia has hepatitis C and is currently dying in prison. And rather than just sue the prison system for on his own behalf, he's sued on behalf of all prisoners in Pennsylvania. In New York, if you have Hep C as a prisoner, you will get treated. And thus far, he's been unable to be treated because he keeps insisting as political work to like launch this on behalf of all all prisoners, period. All prisoners are political prisoners. Anyway, so that was just a footnote to the beginning of that. Yeah, we were both in Philadelphia on Friday, no, day before yesterday, for the 5th anniversary of that.